When Denzel Washington stepped into a small suburban community center for a youth charity event, no one expected what was about to unfold. The room was filled with parents, teachers, and kids, none of them knowing that a single outburst would turn an ordinary afternoon into a moment that would echo across the country. That's when a woman stood up and hurled the most hateful insult she could think of. But instead of anger, Denzel responded with something far more powerful. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it sparked a viral lesson in grace, dignity, and the true meaning of strength. The air inside the Lincoln Park Community Center hummed with a soft energy. Rows of folding chairs lined the modest gymnasium, now transformed into a makeshift auditorium, as families, students, and local residents filled the room with quiet chatter. The event, a fundraiser for a youth empowerment program, promised live music, student speakers, and one special guest, though no one knew exactly who. Banners hung from the rafters. Invest in the future, empower today. The scent of catered finger food mingled with the faint whiff of gym floor wax. Kids clutched paper programs. Parents leaned in to whisper guesses about the keynote speaker. Then the doors opened. Denzel Washington stepped in with no entourage, wearing a simple charcoal blazer and the kind of presence that made time seem to pause. For a moment, the room seemed to exhale all at once, a ripple of recognition sweeping through the crowd. Some clapped, others simply stared in awe. He offered a modest wave, smiling as he moved toward the podium set up at the front. No fanfare, no announcement, just Denzel, stepping into the moment with quiet dignity. His eyes scanned the room, not looking down on it, but into it. A few young boys in the front row straightened their posture, sitting up a little taller. As he took the mic, the room hushed itself. The chatter faded, all eyes locked in. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth but grounded, the kind that didn't need volume to command a room. "It's a privilege to be here with you all today, especially to speak about something that matters, our youth, our future." But just as the warmth began to spread across the room, a sharp voice sliced through the calm like broken glass. From the middle row, a woman's voice rose, not with curiosity, not with confusion, but contempt. The spell was broken. Every head turned. In a room full of hope and celebration, the air suddenly turned colder, and in that split second, the afternoon's mood shifted from unity to disbelief. The crowd would never forget what she said next. She stood abruptly, her folding chair screeching backward against the polished floor. In her early 60s, with a crisp white blouse and tightly pursed lips, she looked like someone's neighbor, someone's grandmother. But her voice held none of that warmth. "Go back to Africa," she shouted. It wasn't a whisper or a slip of the tongue. It was loud, proud, and sharp enough to leave a scar. Gasps erupted like dominoes, falling in every direction. Someone in the back knocked over a plastic cup, soda splashing across the floor unnoticed. Eyes darted toward the woman, then to Denzel, then back again, searching for how to process what had just happened. The woman didn't look embarrassed. She didn't even flinch. She stood there, arms crossed, as if daring anyone to challenge her. Denzel didn't move, not right away. He stood still behind the microphone, one hand resting gently on the podium. His expression unreadable, not shocked, not exactly, but still. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick. It was alive. The kind of silence that made people sweat. The kind that made time slow down and hearts pound faster. No one knew what to do. A few people glanced toward security. A man near the exit shifted uncomfortably, as if considering whether to intervene. But Denzel raised his hand slightly, not in anger, not even in command. Just enough to say, "Wait." He took a slow breath, then another. He looked out into the crowd, not at the woman, not yet, but at the dozens of stunned faces watching him for guidance, waiting to see what he'd say, how he'd react. The woman remained standing, defiant, still, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth like she'd won something, like she thought she'd gotten under his skin. But Denzel didn't rush, didn't snap, didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly into the microphone, the corner of his mouth tightening just enough to show that yes, he had heard every word. And when he finally spoke, the weight of the room shifted again. Not with anger, but with something much more powerful. Silence hung in the air, not because he didn't have words, but because the next ones would matter, and everyone knew it. The tension in the room wrapped around every person like a noose. Murmurs began to bubble, then stalled. Some attendees turned to the woman, others looked to the exit, as if wondering whether the event would go on at all. A pair of security guards near the back of the gym started moving, slowly, deliberately, toward the woman. Their shoulders were squared, faces tight with professionalism, but their eyes burned with embarrassment. Not for themselves, but for the moment, for what had been said, for what it meant. But before they could make it halfway, Denzel moved. He didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted his hand, palm flat, fingers spread slightly, like a conductor pausing the orchestra. The motion was quiet, deliberate, and commanding. The security guards stopped mid-step. The woman's smirk faltered for the first time. And then Denzel looked at her, not with fury, not with pity, not even with disbelief. His gaze was even, steady, like he was peering through her, not just at her. A silence deeper than the one before settled in the room. It wasn't the awkward kind anymore, it was reverent, like everyone knew something significant was happening, even if they didn't know what. Denzel didn't blink, he didn't shift. His hands dropped slowly back to the podium. And yet, somehow, the weight of the moment only grew heavier. The woman, arms still crossed, seemed less sure of herself now. Her posture stiffened, not with pride, but with caution. Around her, the crowd remained frozen, unsure of what they were supposed to do, what they were allowed to feel. Someone sniffled. Another cleared their throat, but no one dared speak. Denzel scanned the crowd again, letting his eyes pass over the young black boys in the front row, the Latina mothers toward the back, the teachers and volunteers and parents and grandparents, each of them now caught in the same hush. And finally, Denzel inhaled slowly. Everyone leaned in just slightly, unconsciously. He was about to speak, but before the words came, he let the silence have its say. Denzel gripped the sides of the podium gently, like a man bracing himself, not from weakness, but from the gravity of what needed to be said. His eyes never left the woman who'd hurled the words meant to reduce him. He studied her face, not with contempt, but with something harder to define, something deeper. Then he turned slightly, addressing the room instead. "You know," he said slowly, his voice low and deliberate, "when I was 12, I saw my mother cry after being followed around a department store." No one moved. He continued, his voice gaining only the slightest edge. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just there. And someone decided that was enough reason to treat her like a threat. Denzel paused, letting the words settle. "I didn't understand it then, but I do now." He stepped back from the mic just for a second, letting the silence rush back in like a tide. You grow up, and you realize the world has rules written in fine print, rules that say, stay in your place, don't stand too tall, don't speak too clear. He exhaled. You learn to read the room before you enter it. You learn to keep your voice soft, even when your heart is loud. A wave of emotion passed through the room, subtle but unmistakable. "I've had doors closed before I even knew they were there," he said. "I've been told I was too much, too black, too proud, too present. Not with words, always. Sometimes it's a look, a tone, a pause." He looked directly at the woman again, but his words were now for everyone. And sometimes it's just 3 words meant to erase 400 years of history. The room felt like it was holding its breath inside a moment that stretched far beyond its walls. He let the silence return, Let it press down. Let everyone feel it. No applause, no reactions. Just the heavy truth, hanging in the air like fog that refused to lift. Because some moments don't need a clever comeback. They need to be sat in, felt, faced, and that's exactly what Denzel made the crowd do. Denzel let the silence breathe a little longer before leaning in, his voice steady, clear. "Let me tell you a story," he said almost gently. The crowd leaned closer again, the tension still lingering, but now folded into curiosity. The woman who had shouted at him sat back down with a huff, her arms crossed, her mouth tight, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. "I was maybe 9 years old," Denzel began, "walking home from school with my brother. We were just kids, laughing, messing around like boys do." He paused, the memory flickering across his face like a faint shadow. A white man, older, walked by and looked at us like we weren't supposed to be there, said something under his breath. My brother didn't hear it, but I did. He tapped the side of the podium. That night, I asked my mother why someone would look at us like that, why they'd say something ugly to kids just walking home. The room was still, hanging on every word. She didn't get angry. She didn't curse him. She looked me in the eye and said, "Baby, some people wear their fear like armor. Don't let their fear turn into your shame." Denzel's voice softened. "She taught me not to let other people's ignorance define my worth. That strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's how you carry yourself when no one else is clapping for you." He glanced again at the woman whose smirk had faded into something more neutral. Her eyes blinked once, slowly, still defiant, but not unmoved. "My mother," Denzel continued, "used to iron uniforms for other people's children so I could wear clean clothes to school. She did it without bitterness, without complaint. She told me, dignity isn't something anyone can give you or take away. You wear it, you live it." He paused again, letting the words linger. "I come from a woman who knew her worth even when the world didn't see it." The room felt fuller now, not from noise, but from truth, from legacy. "And I stand here," he said, "because I was raised to face hatred with grace. Not because I'm weak, but because I'm strong enough not to hate back." Denzel adjusted the mic slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd once more. No notes, no teleprompter, just his voice, and the weight it carried. "My mother didn't teach me that strength in a vacuum," he said. "She taught me because she came from it, because we come from it." He took a quiet breath. "I want you to imagine this," he said, "being ripped from your land, from your family, from everything you know, chained, branded, sold, treated like cattle. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared straight ahead, unblinking. "My ancestors were slaves," Denzel continued. "Their bodies were broken, their names erased, their languages stolen." He paused, his voice steady but heavy. "And yet, they survived." The room was silent, the mood deepening into reverence. "They didn't survive so I could play small, so I could bow my head when insulted. They survived so I could stand here, in this moment, and speak truth to ignorance." His eyes swept the crowd again. "You see what that woman said?" He gestured subtly toward the side of the room. "It wasn't just about me. It was about every person who's ever been told they don't belong, every person who's been made to feel less than." He leaned forward. "My roots are not something I'm ashamed of. They're the reason I stand the way I do, speak the way I do, live the way I do." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "I carry generations inside me, generations who couldn't vote, who couldn't read, who weren't even allowed to look a white man in the eye without risking their life." He glanced toward the front row, where a little black girl clutched her father's hand, wide-eyed and listening. They dreamed of freedom, of dignity, of having a voice. He nodded once. "Well, I am that voice." The crowd erupted into quiet applause, not a roar, but a deep, resonant show of solidarity, the kind of applause that comes not from entertainment, but from being moved. "And I will never," Denzel added, "apologize for the strength they gave me." He stepped back slightly, letting that truth fill the room. This wasn't just a response anymore, it was a reckoning. The room was still pulsing with the energy of Denzel's words, quiet, heavy, undeniable. He let the applause fade into a respectful silence before shifting slightly, his tone softening, not in strength, but in approach. And then, without theatrics, without venom, he looked back at the woman. Not with contempt, with clarity. "I'm not going to yell at you," he said, his voice low and calm. "I'm not going to embarrass you or return hate for hate. That's not how I was raised." The woman didn't speak. Her arms were still crossed, but her jaw had tensed. "I just want to ask you one question," Denzel continued. "Not to shame you, but maybe to help you see." He paused. "What do you gain by trying to shrink someone else?" The words floated into the air, hovering like a challenge, but not a threat, a mirror. "You see me standing up here, and maybe something inside you felt uncomfortable. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's pain. Maybe it's something someone once told you about people who look like me." His voice never wavered. "But let's be real, for just a moment. What do you actually get by trying to make someone else feel small?" He let the question breathe. The woman's eyes flickered, as if searching for an answer, but finding none she wanted to say out loud. "I'm not angry with you," Denzel said. "I'm sorry for you." A quiet shift rolled through the crowd, like someone had cracked a window and let in new air. "I don't need you to understand everything about me or about where I come from, but I do hope one day you understand why trying to silence someone only reveals how loud your own wounds really are." He didn't preach, he didn't scold, he didn't gloat. He simply held up the truth and asked her to look at it, not through the lens of race, but through the lens of humanity. And that, more than anything, was what shook the room. For a long moment, the room remained completely still. No one shifted, no one whispered. It was as if every soul in the building had turned inward at the same time, searching for how to feel, how to respond. Even the hum of the air conditioning felt louder than the silence. The woman who had spoken those cruel words now sat motionless. Her crossed arms had loosened, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if the certainty she'd entered with had begun to dissolve beneath the weight of a truth she hadn't expected to confront. Denzel didn't say anything more. He just stood there, composed and quiet, letting the moment hang, letting the crowd decide what it meant. And then it happened, a single clap from the front row. A young man in his 20s, wearing a faded hoodie and eyes full of something like pride. He clapped twice, firm, unapologetic. Another followed, a teacher sitting beside him, then an older woman near the back. The rhythm caught, uncertain at first, then steady. Clap, 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 clap. Like rain beginning on a dry roof. Within seconds, the entire room was clapping, not out of obligation, not even out of politeness, but because the moment demanded it. Because truth had filled the room, and people knew instinctively to honor it. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. The applause rolled like a wave across the gymnasium, from left to right, front to back. Even the staff near the snack table stood frozen in awe, their hands slowly joining in. Denzel didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply nodded, once, gracious but grounded. This wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning met with respect. And yet, in the corner of the room, the woman remained seated, silent, still, her eyes cast downward. For the first time that afternoon, she wasn't trying to be heard. She was trying to understand. And in that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Because the crowd hadn't just reacted to Denzel's strength, they had witnessed what dignity looked like in the face of ignorance, and they had chosen to rise with it. The applause faded slowly, as if reluctant to leave the moment. People settled back into their seats, glancing around, unsure whether the event would continue or if they'd just witnessed the climax of something far larger than a keynote address. And then, like a pebble dropped back into still water, the woman stood again. She didn't yell this time. Her voice was louder than a whisper, but barely carried across the room. I'm tired, she said. Tired of being told what I can say, what I can't. Everyone's so sensitive now. You can't even speak your mind without being called a bigot. A few murmurs rippled, some disapproving, others uncertain. Denzel didn't flinch. He let her speak, but he stepped forward slowly, his presence calm but firm, like a tide coming in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sigh or scoff. Instead, he met her words with a pause, a breath, and then, "This isn't about being correct," he said gently. "It's about being human." The words struck like a bell in a cathedral, clear, resonant, unshakable. He looked at her, not through her, but at her, really at her. "You're not tired of political correctness," he continued. "You're tired of a world that's shifting away from the version you grew up with. And that fear, that confusion, it's real, I get that." He paused, eyes softening slightly. "But when you stand up and tell someone to go back to Africa, that's not frustration talking, that's something deeper. That's pain that's been twisted into a weapon." The woman blinked, visibly taken aback, not because he'd yelled, but because he hadn't, because he had seen her, even when she hadn't asked to be seen. "This isn't about sides," Denzel said. "It's about recognizing that the people you lash out at are human beings just like you." The room was still again. But this time, it wasn't tension holding them, it was understanding, slowly blooming. Denzel let the words settle before stepping closer, not invading her space, but bridging a gap that hadn't been crossed in decades. "What are you holding on to?" he asked, his tone quiet. Not accusing, just curious, almost gentle. "What's hurting in you that makes you want to hurt someone else?" The woman opened her mouth, then closed it. She shifted uncomfortably, her arms falling to her sides for the first time. Her gaze wandered, trying to find something to anchor to. Then her voice, brittle and shaky, broke the silence. "I lost my job," she said. "A few months ago, after 20 years, downsized, replaced." The room didn't react. It just listened. "They told me they needed to diversify. That was the word they used." Her voice cracked. "And I didn't understand. I gave everything to that place, and I watched them pass me over again and again for people who didn't look like me." There it was, the pain underneath the prejudice. She wasn't just angry. She was grieving. "I felt invisible," she continued, "like I didn't matter anymore, like the world moved on and didn't care who it crushed." The words didn't excuse her outburst, but they explained it. And in that raw confession, the room felt something unexpected. Empathy. Not approval, not agreement, just a shared understanding that pain wears many faces. Denzel nodded slowly. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said. "Truly, no one should feel discarded. No one should feel unseen." The woman's eyes filled, tears threatening to fall, but holding firm. "But the answer," Denzel continued, "isn't to tear someone else down so you can feel taller. That's not healing. That's just passing the wound along." The moment felt different now, not a confrontation, a conversation, a wound meeting a mirror. For the first time since the woman's words pierced the room, she looked less like a villain and more like someone who got lost somewhere along the way. And Denzel? He didn't just win the room, he expanded it. The gymnasium was quiet but not empty. It was full with breath, with thought, with the collective stillness of people processing something bigger than what they'd come in for. Denzel stood in that silence, not as an actor on a stage, but as a man offering truth in the middle of fire. He looked at the woman, then at the crowd, and then back again. "I'm not here to excuse what you said," he said calmly, evenly. "Words matter. And what you said hurt, not just me, but everyone who's ever been made to feel like a stranger in their own home. The woman didn't argue. She just listened. "But I've learned," he continued, "that hurt people, and the easy thing is to hurt them back." He paused, letting the crowd absorb that. But healing doesn't come from hate. It comes from truth. His voice didn't rise, but it rang with clarity. It echoed, not in volume, but in depth. "You want to talk about being tired? We're all tired. Tired of the labels, the suspicion, the separation. But tired doesn't give us permission to hate. It gives us a reason to understand." The woman's gaze flickered again, still guarded, but softening around the edges. Denzel turned his attention to the crowd now, speaking to every person who had felt silenced and every person who had never been challenged to listen. "I'm not up here for applause," he said. "I'm up here because I believe people can change." A few heads nodded. A few people wiped their eyes. "I believe that grace isn't a weakness. It's the strongest thing we've got." And in that moment, the room was captivated, not just by his poise, but by his depth. His ability to stand in the center of a fire and not throw flames, but water. He didn't lecture, he led. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands firm and refuses to hate. The woman didn't speak. She didn't apologize. But something shifted. Her shoulders, once pulled tight with defiance, dropped an inch. Her arms, once crossed like a barricade, now rested loosely at her sides. Her chin lowered, not in shame, but in something quieter. Recognition. It wasn't an apology, but it was the beginning of one. And Denzel didn't push her. He didn't demand anything more, because he knew something had already changed. He turned back to the crowd, his expression calm, composed. The applause from earlier had faded, but something richer lingered. Respect, reflection, stillness that meant people were thinking. He stepped back to the microphone one last time. "Let this be a reminder," he said, "that ignorance doesn't deserve more hate. It deserves a lesson." His words dropped like stones into a pond, sending ripples through the room. "Because when we fight hate with hate," he said, "nobody wins. But when we shine light on it, people start to see." The audience was silent but alert. No one was scrolling their phones. No one looked away. Every eye was on him, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. Denzel looked at the children in the front row, the ones who had watched this unfold, the ones learning what it meant to stand tall without stepping on others. He gave them a nod. "Dignity," he said, "doesn't raise its voice. It raises the bar." The woman sat still. Maybe she hadn't expected to be seen. Maybe she hadn't wanted to be. But now she was, fully, deeply, and without being destroyed in the process. That was the power of grace. Not to erase the wrong, but to respond with something stronger. And as Denzel stepped away from the mic, there were no standing ovations, no loud cheers, just silence. The kind that comes after something real has been said, the kind that means people are walking away different, even if they don't know it yet. For a few seconds, the silence held, and then, slowly, like a match struck in a quiet room, someone stood, then another, and another, until the room rose as one, a standing ovation, not of spectacle, but of substance. Applause rolled through the community center like thunder, not wild or chaotic, but deep and deliberate. The kind that comes not just from agreement, but from recognition, from hearts cracked open. "Speak the truth," someone shouted near the back. "Thank you, Denzel," another called, her voice thick with emotion. The front row clapped harder. The volunteers near the snack tables joined in. A few people wiped tears from their cheeks as they stood, palms echoing against the walls and ceiling like an old gospel choir. This wasn't for a celebrity. This was for a man who had brought stillness, light, and courage into a space that needed all three. Denzel didn't raise his hands. He didn't soak in the moment. He simply nodded once in gratitude, his gaze sweeping over the audience, anchoring briefly on the young, the elders, the people who had truly seen what had just happened. And then, quietly, unnoticed by most, the woman stood and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. No one stopped her. There was no shame hurled at her, no jeering, just the sound of applause in her wake, a sound she couldn't outrun. It wasn't the crowd that had dismissed her. It was the truth that had invited her to grow. She walked out into the afternoon sun, changed, or at least cracked open enough for something better to find its way in. And inside, the room kept standing. Because when someone speaks a truth you've carried in your bones, your whole life, you rise. When the applause finally settled, Denzel stepped back to the microphone one last time. The room, still standing, waited, but his voice was softer now, like the eye of a storm had passed, and only the sky remained. "I didn't come here today to make headlines," he said. "I came to speak on something that goes deeper than race or headlines or hurt feelings." He paused, scanning the crowd. "I came here to speak about empathy, about history, about self-worth." People leaned in, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "There's power in remembering who you are," he continued, "and more importantly, who you come from, the people who paved your way, who endured so you could rise." He turned toward the rows of young people, high school students, youth program participants, little kids perched on their parents' laps. "I know what the world can try to tell you," he said, "that your background is a weight, that where you're from is something to run from." He shook his head. "But I'm here to tell you the truth." He pointed gently, not accusing, inviting. "Don't let anyone tell you that where you're from defines how far you can go." A hush fell again, not because they didn't want to respond, but because they were feeling it, because that sentence landed like a seed in every heart, young and old. "Where you're from," he said, "that's your foundation, not your ceiling." He smiled now, not wide, but real. "Use it, build with it, grow from it." The speech was over, but the moment would ripple long after the room emptied. He stepped away from the mic, not to applause this time, but to silence. The kind that doesn't need a sound to prove it changed you. It didn't take long. By nightfall, the clip had already made its rounds, posted first by a teenager near the back row who filmed most of the event on her phone. Then it spread to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Within hours, millions had seen it. The headline was irresistible to some: "Denzel Washington silences racist heckler in powerful takedown." News anchors replayed the moment. Edits were made, dramatic music added. Commentators debated whether his words were too soft or just right. But those who were actually there, they knew better. Because it hadn't been a takedown. It had been a stand-up. A moment where grace refused to yield to bitterness, where humanity took the microphone and didn't let go. Denzel stayed quiet through the storm of media frenzy. He didn't go on talk shows, didn't do interviews. And when he finally released a statement, it wasn't a victory lap. It was a reminder. This wasn't about a viral moment. It was about reflection, not retaliation. Hate wants an audience. But healing wants intention. My hope is that we start choosing the harder thing: listening, learning, leading with grace. The statement spread faster than the video itself. Classrooms started using the footage in discussions on empathy and history. Community centers turned it into workshops. College professors played it before lectures on modern race relations. Even churches and schools in small towns held forums around it, not because it was about a celebrity, but because it was about something far more universal. It was about what happens when someone doesn't clap back with anger, but with truth. The woman at the center of it never gave a public comment, but in one small, grainy photo she was seen standing in the back of a local seminar, head bowed, arms no longer crossed. And Denzel? He went back to what he always did: quiet service, leading from behind the scenes, not feeding the media storm, but sowing seeds where they grow slow and deep, because he knew the truth. Not every battle is won with volume. Some are won with stillness, with clarity, with presence. And as the story settled into its place in hearts across the country, one line remained, spoken not for applause, but for memory. Sometimes the most powerful clapback is grace. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.